You know, if you've ever logged into a computer at work or grabbed a file from a shared drive or even just used an office printer, you have, without a doubt, used Active Directory. It is the invisible digital skeleton that holds up pretty much every corporate network out there. But for most of us, it's a total black box. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and demystify this critical system, what it is, how it works, and why it's so incredibly important. So to really get Active Directory, you first have to appreciate the massive problem it was designed to solve. Just picture it. You're the head of IT for a huge company. We're talking thousands of employees, thousands of computers, all needing access to different files, printers, apps. How on earth do you manage all of that without it just turning into absolute, utter chaos? Well, that's the exact question Active Directory was born to answer. And the solution, believe it or not, is beautifully simple in concept. You build a database. At its heart, Active Directory, or AD as you'll hear it called, is really just a big, smart, hierarchical database. It's a central phone book, a master list of every single object on the network. We're talking users, computers, printers, file folders, you name it. It gives administrators one single place to manage everything. All right, so here's our game plan. We've just talked about the big problem and the simple answer. Next up, we're going to dive into the logical blueprint, how AD organizes all this information. Then we'll see how that maps onto the physical network in the real world. After that, we'll get into AD's two most important jobs, and finally, we'll wrap up with why this is still an absolutely critical skill to have today. Yeah, before Active Directory, managing a network was just chaos. It was like the digital Wild West. Every single server had its own list of users. That meant you needed a different password for your email, for the file server, for the print server. It was a mess. AD brought law and order to that chaos. But it didn't just appear out of thin air. It was an evolution.
See, Active Directory didn't just show up one day. As you can see here, it evolved. Things started back in the 80s with these really heavy, complex standards. Then in the 90s, something called LDAP came along, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which, as the name implies, made things a whole lot simpler. Microsoft's early attempt, Windows NT Domains, was the step in the right direction, but honestly, it was pretty rigid. Then finally, with Windows 2000, Microsoft put all the pieces together and gave us the powerful Active Directory we know today.
Okay, so we've established that AD is a database, but how does it actually organize everything? I mean, all those users, all those computers, that's where the logical structure comes in. And this is key. Think of it like an architect's blueprint for your entire company, completely separate from where the actual physical buildings are.
At the very top of this whole structure, you have what's called the forest. The forest is, well, it's everything. It's the ultimate container, it's the absolute security boundary for the entire organization. And a fun little fact, it actually gets its name from the very first domain you create inside it. That first domain is called the forest root.
Now, inside that forest, you have at least one and maybe many domains. A domain is really the workhorse of Active Directory. It's the main way you group things up together for management, and it gets a unique name, like mycorp.com. It's the main boundary where you set security policies and decide who can manage what.
And then, inside each domain, we get even more granular with organizational units, or OUs. And this is where the real magic happens for day-to-day management. OUs are basically just folders that you can create to mirror your company's actual structure, like sales, marketing, HR. But their most important job is to delegate control. You can give the manager of the sales OU the power to reset passwords just for her team, without giving her the keys to the entire kingdom. It's incredibly powerful.
And this right here just lays it all out perfectly. You see the big picture. You've got the forest at the top. Inside that, maybe you have a domain for a whole continent, like asia.mycorp.com, and inside that domain, you've got an OU for the manufacturing department. And then finally, inside that OU, you place the actual objects, a user like Jane Doe and her specific computer. It's just a clean, logical way to organize everything.
Okay, so that's the logical blueprint. That's the what. But Active Directory also needs a physical map. It needs to know the where. So this next part is all about how AD takes that logical structure and maps it onto the real-world network of your offices, your data centers, and all the wires connecting them.
Now, this is a really crucial distinction to understand, maybe the most common point of confusion. The logical structure is all about how your business is organized on paper, your departments, your regions.
The physical structure is about where your network hardware actually lives in the real world. One defines what you're managing, and the other defines where it is, and more importantly, how data can get there efficiently.
The main building block of the physical structure is called a site. And a site in Active Directory is exactly what it sounds like. It's a representation of a physical location that has fast, reliable network connections. Think of your New York office or your London data center. You define it simply by telling AD which IP addresses belong to that location.
So why do we even care about sites? Well, it all comes down to one critical process: replication. That huge Active Directory database has to be kept in sync on multiple servers, which are called domain controllers. By defining your sites, you can tell Active Directory, hey, listen, the connection between our New York and Tokyo offices is pretty slow and expensive, so don't just send updates constantly. Maybe only sync up every hour and make sure you compress the data first. It's what keeps the whole system from grinding to a halt over a global network.
All right, so we've got the structure down, both logical and physical. Now let's get to the good stuff. What does Active Directory actually do all day? Well, when you boil it all down, it really has two fundamental jobs for every person and every computer on the network. First, figure out who you are, and second, decide what you're allowed to do. The first job is authentication. That's just a fancy word for proving you are who you say you are. Usually that's with a username and password. Think of it this way: authentication is the key that gets you in the front door of the building. The second job is authorization. Once you're inside, authorization is what determines which specific rooms you can unlock. Can you get into the accounting folder? Are you allowed to use the expensive color printer? That's authorization.
So authentication is powered by a really clever protocol called Kerberos, and it's what makes the magic of single sign-on happen. Here's the gist of it. You log in once in the morning, right? You prove your identity. In return, AD gives your computer a kind of master key, a super secure thing called a ticket granting ticket. Then, all day long, whenever you want to access something new, your computer secretly uses that master ticket to get a special single-use pass just for that one thing. And the result? You get into everything you need without having to type your password over and over and over again. It's seamless.
Now, for the other side of that coin, authorization, the main tool is something called group policy. And honestly, this might be the single most powerful feature in all of Active Directory. It is how IT admins manage and enforce rules across the entire company, at scale. With group policy, they can do anything from automatically mapping network drives for the sales team, to blocking people from installing unapproved software, or even just making sure everyone has the official company logo as their desktop background. It's the central nervous system for managing the entire network.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. With all the buzz about the cloud, you might be wondering, is Active Directory kinda old news? And the answer is a resounding no. It is still one of the most foundational, critical pieces of IT in any enterprise, and understanding it is an invaluable skill.
One quick thing to clear up. You might hear about different flavors of AD. Everything we've been talking about today, managing a whole company, its users, its computers, that's officially called Active Directory Domain Services, or ADDS. There's also a much smaller, stripped-down version called ADLDS that a developer might use for just one specific application. The key thing to remember is that ADDS is the big one, the enterprise-wide system that runs basically every business you can think of.
And because it's so deeply embedded in everything a business does, it's still an essential skill. Just listen to Microsoft MVP Andy Malone, who says, Active Directory Domain Services is such an important skill, especially if you want to move your IT career forward. Even in a world that's racing to the cloud, that foundation is absolutely critical. Which, of course, brings us to the big final question. As the cloud continues to grow, what is the future of this on-premises directory that we've just been talking about? Well, the future isn't about replacement, it's about integration. We're moving to a hybrid world where cloud services like Azure Active Directory work hand in hand with the on-premises AD we just demystified. So understanding this digital skeleton isn't just relevant, it's more important than ever, because it is the foundation that the future of all enterprise identity is being built upon.